guy at number 1 on Google is paying X amount of money. You could be number 3 and pay half of what he's paying. So let's be in at number 3 because you're still going to be seen. The whole idea is you don't want them to scroll down and go to the second page of Google because 90% of the people go to the first page of Google and they won't go to the second page of Google. What they will do is they will redefine and type in something different before they actually go to that second page of Google.
You're listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast with your hosts Ryan Klein and Chase Williams, the go-to podcast for learning from the experts in the legal community about effective ways to grow and manage your law firm.
Today on the Legal Mastermind Podcast, we have James Moorhouse. He's been in the legal marketing industry since 1999, so over 20 years. Very impressive. He's currently a consultant for JPM for Marketing. And today we're going to be talking about a couple different subjects. One, evaluating your target audience. So really trying to figure out who that target audience is, who that target market is. We'll be diving in to see when it's actually worth it to go after specific keywords. Really, I think with the long-term goal, it really is trying to nail down how a law firm can figure out what can I do with my money to get the best ROI. So a lot of topics to go over today. James is an expert. I like to call him an OG in the legal marketing space. And of course, I have my podcast host, business partner, Ryan Klein here as well. Welcome to the Legal Mastermind Podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I guess starting off, James, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, definitely. I started in 1999 working for a criminal defense law firm that I was at for several years, 6+ years to be exact. And I'll give a shout out to them because I'll probably send them a link eventually. They were a Wallin and Klarich, one of the biggest criminal defense law firms in Southern California. They're based in Tustin. And I learned a lot of tricks of the trades from the mentor of mine, Mr. Paul Wallin, who was one of those attorneys who didn't like to go to court as much, but loved the marketing side of things and literally would pull his hair out for everything that we were doing from the marketing side of the world. We were doing yellow page ads, if you guys recall what those were back in the days, double truck ads, quarter page ads, and different types of ads that we actually did. And then we started with this little thing called Overture, which actually is now called Google. Pretty much Overture was a short-lived pay-per-click campaign that we started for the criminal defense side of things in all of Southern California. And we were just bidding on certain keywords. And we did everything back then from magazine articles to newspapers. In the back of Los Angeles Times, there was an attorney directory section where all the attorneys could advertise on the Sunday paper. And a lot of print marketing back then, from the yellow pages to the magazine to the newspapers. And we were getting decent ROI, but it was very expensive. And then we kind of got into some of the Google through Overture originally to start. And then after that, I went over to a personal injury law firm for a year and stayed there. And with personal injury lawyers, the marketing budget's kind of up and down. Depends on the case, depends on how many cases settle for that particular time. So good months and bad months, we had more money to spend on marketing. Did a lot of the same things with Yellow Pages, a lot of the same things with Google, just kind of getting our feet wet. And after that, I spent about 5 years working with a company called Massive Website Marketing. I joined forces with another consultant who was doing legal marketing for a bankruptcy attorney in Orange County. And then since then, I've kind of ventured into different things, some in-house, working for family law, criminal law, personal injury, bankruptcy law, employment law. In the past 3 years, I've just been consulting on myself, usually with contract jobs for attorneys. I'm just, a freelancer. I don't really consider myself an agency, but I'm just a freelancer who would meet with the attorney and figure out what's the best ROI, what's the best market value, who our target audience is, who our target market is, and what can we do and how can we bring in clients that are going to be very cost effective and not cost the firm an arm and a leg, but at the same time balance everything so we have business coming in consistently is the key.
Thanks, James. So ROI, that's always what people are thinking. You have the conversation, you can go in a million different directions, but we can kind of tighten that up a little bit by talking about this target audience and maybe the target geography. So kind of starting there for a lawyer, considering engaging in a new campaign, and they're typically looking in their own backyard most of the time. They're like, here's my office. I kind of have to do everything here, but that's not always the case. So in your experience, how do you kind of evaluate it a little bit differently?
Yeah, I always come to them and say, what's your approach? And their approach is like, I want my phone to ring. And I said, how does your phone ring now? They're like, we don't know. We're doing Martindale Hubble. We're doing AVO. We're doing this legal directory. We're doing some of this magazine where I'm at the top of the journal. I have this award and I have that award and I'm doing all these different things and the phone's ringing, but we don't know exactly where or how it's ringing. and it's definitely not ringing enough. That's usually the kind of approach I get. So I always say, okay, let's try to establish a marketing budget. They're like, marketing budget? What's that? We don't have a marketing budget. And I say, okay, let's try to establish a marketing budget over time, because then that's going to definitely help you kind of grow and expand into other areas. So I said, okay, what's our target areas? And they kind of say, well, all of California. I said, okay, let's narrow that down right now. Let's start locally, not necessarily in your backyard, but within a 100-mile radius of where your office is. Let's see what business we can kind of trigger from that. Let's try one particular practice area. Let's figure out what the keywords would be for that particular practice area that we're trying to go after. And based on that, if it works on that one area, let's say in Orange County, then we can take that to Ventura or up north in San Francisco, and we can kind of use that strategy. Let's make it work in one spot, and then it might work and it should work elsewhere, but it might cost you a lot more in San Francisco to advertise for that particular practice area and those particular keywords than it would in Riverside, California, let's say. So we kind of narrow it down based on the market research. As you know, you could do a lot of keyword initial research, kind of figure out what keywords are trending, what keywords are being searched within the last 30 days, and kind of put a proposal together based on this. And of course, based on their competition, we can put things together to say, okay, this is what your competition is doing. These are the keywords that are being searched a lot. And based on that, let's form a game plan. And the good thing about the online advertising is that you could start a campaign, you could pause a campaign, you could stop a campaign. Not back in the day when I had yellow page ads where you were stuck in the yellow page book for a year and you couldn't do anything, and you realize after month 2, this might not necessarily work. So at least with the online world, you can kind of stop and start stuff and kind of spread your wings, so to speak, to a certain extent.
I do have a question. As far as establishing a budget, because that seems like it's really hard. In my shoes, when you go to a lawyer and you say, "Oh, what's the budget working with?" I think 95% of the time it's just like, "Well, I don't know. I don't really have anything in mind." You do have some people that are like $500 a month, and then you're like, "Oh, I don't know what that's going to do." But so when you're working with them, is there kind of an approach? Not even from a sales standpoint, just what a lawyer should be considering. Like, is it a percentage of my annual revenue that's a market?
Right. That's what I say. Let's try to take a certain percentage, a very low percentage to start with, maybe 10 to 20% of what's your annual revenue that you actually come in. And can we put that back into our marketing budget? And then I say, let's take it on a month-to-month basis. So in 1 month, you retain a certain amount of clients coming in from a certain marketing campaign. Now, can we add an extra 5% to that marketing budget? I always feel a good 25 to 33% of your annual revenue will be a very, very good start, and gives you enough money and the flexibility to kind of do stuff that works and possibly won't work, but we'll be able to evaluate it and be able to come back to you with a good time and a good answer. And I kind of do that by kind of strategizing and say, hey, I've looked at these keywords. I think they're going to cost you this amount of money. Based on certain data, we think we might get X amount of clicks for this particular county and or practice area. And that's how we kind of fluctuate with the marketing and with the budget at hand.
So I guess once we have that established budget, a lot of it comes down to, once that budget's identified, how far is it going to, stretch?
Yes.
And a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm a lawyer in Miami. I want to target everybody in the whole state of Florida. And that's not necessarily the best.
Of course. Your budget is not going to last long.
And then targeting Miami might not even be the best approach as well. Maybe it might make sense to target specific subdivisions of Miami or close cities.
Yes,
so do you want to talk about that strategy really, as far as I guess the easiest thing is that theoretical question. So I'm a lawyer in Miami. I've dedicated a budget to you. And now what's really the next step in identifying that target market?
We can dive into Miami, and this budget might last a couple weeks, might last a little bit longer, but we're going to spend money, and we're probably going to spend it too fast, and we might not get our good ROI back from that. So we could possibly spend a little bit in Miami, but let's take, certain surrounding cities and surrounding areas just outside of Miami and try to be able to kind of bring people from the other areas into your area. And if you don't have an actual office in those other cities, then we can set up a virtual office if you feel it's important to have a presence there, at least locally, so you can get on different areas and different directories and different local places too. So then I kind of evaluate that, and then it all comes back to your intake department. And we always say, hey, you have a budget. We're going to spend some money. We're actually going to advertise it. But who's going to be taking the calls? Who's the rainmaker in your office? Who's going to be able to identify if this is a good call or a bad call, and or be able to figure out if this is a good lead, a dead lead, or am I going to refer it out to another attorney? Because I do this, but I don't necessarily do exactly what they want to be done. So I want to send it to my friend down the road. So there's a lot of stuff that comes into the marketing budget, a lot of stuff that breaks down. And I always say the first month, I would say a good 30 days, you have to do some initial marketing research. You have to figure out your market. You have to figure out your target. You have to do almost role play and be kind of acting as a client attorney with your employees. And I've done this at other law firms in-house and from a consulting standpoint as well. I said, I'm going to call in, I'm going to be a client. We're going to role play, and I'm going to see how you're going to answer my questions and how long is it going to take me to be able to speak to the attorney. Are you speaking to me for 5 minutes? Or are you speaking to me to even longer than that? How are you going to be able to approach me, and how are you going to get me over to the attorney so I can ask more questions? And are you just going to set up an initial intake and have me speak with the attorney? Because obviously the attorney's time is valuable and his hourly rate is going to be a lot more than your intake employee. But of course, you need to have somebody with that background that can screen those calls. And that's just as important as your marketing budget, just as important as your target market and audience.
It's actually really interesting you mentioned that. So for lawyers that haven't really actively engaged in any marketing, they're probably growing their business because of former clientele coming back or referrals or network and all that stuff. So once you really get out there and you create a presence of people that really aren't, that familiar with you as they are from those kinds of leads, you definitely have to kind of have some sort of process to work them into a conversion standpoint, because from organic, it's probably like a little bit easier, but you still have to have a good intake process. And if you're doing paid, in some markets, they are notorious for being among the most difficult leads to convert.
Exactly. Yeah, very, very true. And I said it's a fast food industry, especially from a paid advertising standpoint. I don't care if you're doing a Facebook ad, a Google ad, a Bing ad, a Yahoo ad, whatever search engine you're doing some paid advertisement on. It's a fast food industry. They're contacting you, and they might be contacting the next person they see ranked next to you on Google. So they're kind of doing their initial marketing research. And that's the type of client you actually want. You don't want somebody just calling you up one time and say, yeah, I want to hire you guys. You want somebody that's kind of did their due diligence and has kind of researched a couple of firms and said, hey, I like you guys better than this other firm because I feel you're better white glove, customer service oriented. And I want to be able to have you guys hired. And based on your reviews and based on everything else I've seen on your website and the attorney profiles, I feel you would be a good fit for me, especially after my initial intake with the attorney. So yeah, just being able to try to figure all that out and be able to have that established, because a lot of people will say, yeah, let's get it started. And I said, okay, but we don't have the infrastructure in place. It's going to fail. We got to get an infrastructure in place before we do any high marketing. A lot of stuff, like a lot of protocol you kind of have to put in place. And people just feel like, I just put an ad there and I'll get calls. And then what happened? Oh, the calls are coming in. That's great, but how am I handling them? And I've seen a lot of law firms kind of fail just because they don't have that infrastructure. So that's why I kind of was segueing into that myself.
I mean, it could easily be your worst nightmare, and actually our worst nightmare are people you work with, and you see on your end an increase in leads from any campaign. You see it coming in organically and from paid.
Yes.
And then the law firm goes, yeah, but they're not converting. And then you have to go, oh man, we don't really know what your process is or what you're doing for follow-ups or how quickly you're getting back to them. And so how do you bridge that gap to make sure that they really do perceive the leads as being valuable and turning into clients?
Exactly. And what we kind of can segue into that is if you can internally handle that, then we can go through a third party who just take your calls for you. And obviously they're going to charge you a fee for that. But they have a script and they're almost like a call center that's doing this for you, depending on what type of advertising you're doing. I'm doing that right now with mass tort roundup cases, all to do with non-Hopkins. So we've been able to get an intake department kind of to handle that call volume because we're doing a lot of heavy advertising for that.
Kind of going back to some of the strategies we started off with, some paid, maybe Facebook, virtual offices and SEO. Typically, what expectations do you set for your clients? SEO is a long play, but really how long are you expecting the other ones? How much time does it take before you're like, hey, maybe this isn't the right approach for a paid?
Yes, it all depends on the longevity of the law firm, how long they've been around, how long have they been established. If you're just a young attorney and you just started your own office, any sort of business, it's going to take a couple of years to kind of get off the ground. You're not going to see much of a profit the first year or two. You're going to start seeing that in year 3, 4, and 5. If you're a law firm that's been around for 20 years and you've had some success, in marketing, you've had a lot of referrals, you've had a lot of other business, you've had a lot of attorneys who bring in their book of business to the law firm. You're kind of well established. So then it shouldn't take as long, but I always approach it this way. I say, you need a good 6 months to 1 year. And hopefully by year 2, you will be seeing 5 to 10 times the ROI coming back in from any particular paid ad that you're doing. A lot of it's going to be junk stuff, a lot of initial stuff, depending on the practice area. I'll give you an example. My current client does many different practice areas, but he does a lot of employment law. And right now with COVID-19 and the various other things going on with employment law and all the things that are changing, they're getting a lot of window shoppers, I would say, so to speak, calls. So there's a lot of stuff they kind of have to sort through. And based on that, that takes a lot of time for the intake and paralegal, whoever might be taking that call, and then eventually the attorney who might take the call more in depth than the actual intake person themselves. So there's a lot of time and value that kind of goes into that. So I always say from a search engine optimization standpoint, we're looking at a few months to several months. If you want to kind of push it out, I would say 6 months to 1 year. But what we can do is take those keywords that we're going to start optimizing for and kind of looking at and trying to get ranked for. We're going to take that and establish a campaign on Google, and we're going to do a paid ad. And then we're going to figure out within the first 30 days, we're going to have enough data to figure out what keywords are working on Google. So I said, if you want immediate results, we could do the paid ads. And then eventually your paid ad budget can decrease once you start to see organic growth and start to get ranked organically. Then your budget for paid ads doesn't have to be as high, because then you're going to start being ranked organically. And eventually they're all going to kind of balance out.
So once we really have all this in place, the main goal of everything that someone hires you to do when they, you're consulting, hires our company to come in is scalability.
Yes. So
how do you convey scalability and figuring out that ROI? So let's say a lawyer's budget starting off at, $3,000-$4,000 a month, from a marketing standpoint, if you're doing your job right, you always want to be able to scale that up. So what are some
Correct.
processes or ways you're conveying to your clients that, hey, this is your ROI, give me an extra X amount of money, because based off this data, I can guarantee this kind of results?
Yes, ideally, if you say, hey, if I spend twice as much on this one practice area, let's say I should be getting twice as much business. Doesn't necessarily always work that way. Sometimes you'll get more. Sometimes you might get a little less. It just kind of depends. Each month is kind of different as well. Certain months, certain seasonal type of things are actually kind of playing into effect too. But mainly how I establish it is that we kind of look at it and say, okay, let's get a call tracking number for every single advertisement that we do. So then we can do that through many different sources that can track the calls for us. And then we can evaluate the conversion rate based on the number of calls, the number of lead forms that were filled out, the number of email inquiries that came in through a particular website for a particular practice area. We're able to establish, okay, we have X amount of calls, X amount of leads, and this converted depending on what the conversion rate might be. So then we kind of evaluate the numbers. Okay, then next month we're going to add a little bit more. I never go in and say, let's double or triple. I'm kind of conservative. I know how attorneys are, one good month and one bad month, and they might want to, not necessarily continue with a marketing budget. So I said, let's add an extra 1,000 per month for the next 6 months to different practice areas. And then we can kind of slowly start to engage and see that it's actually kind of coming a little bit more profitable. And then once we have enough data and we feel that, based on this extra 1,000, we actually brought in more business, then we can upscale it. Then we can spend an extra 5 or an extra 10. But now I got to have the support staff to be able to handle that. And am I going to be able to handle that internally? Or am I going to have to send this out to a third party, an intake department, almost like a call center that's going to help me take some calls and sign up people depending on what it might be and what type of practice area, what type of retainer I'm trying to get the message out to. So a lot of different factors.
So being scalable doesn't always mean increasing the budget. It can also mean finding support or supplemental vendors to cover some operations.
Yeah, you can kind of come back and say, okay, we're going to take part of our budget and we're going to be able to kind of outsource part of this, and I'm going to be able to advertise this practice area, but I'm going to partner up with another attorney and he's going to handle half of the business coming in from that one particular area. And then you have all these other relationships like attorneys already do. They have a lot of referrals and other third parties that they kind of deal with. And they kind of have to establish it like an outside company, so to speak, themselves, but they're internally doing it themselves and just being able to take that.
So to kind of go back a little bit to talking about target audiences and other opportunities and all that, scaling doesn't necessarily mean also spending an increased budget within your current geography. It can certainly be scaling and then expanding your radius, expanding like the breadth and the radius, I guess you could say, of your advertising.
Like I said, originally when we started out, we do like 100-mile radius.
Yeah.
And then we can expand that throughout certain parts, the Central and Northern California and Southern California. And we kind of figured, okay, we've taken the same approach down here in Southern California for certain practice areas. Now let's take the same approach and do it up north or in Central California. And let's see how successful we are, and or do we need other staff up there? Do we need our other offices like we had spoke about earlier?
Right. And really, especially nowadays when we're recording this, May 20th, and we're talking about finding opportunities elsewhere to expand, your organic and then local and your paid and you're going to other places. We were also discussing why it's more feasible nowadays more than ever because of people not having or wanting to go to an office to visit a lawyer. So we can definitely create another layer of why that is a viable approach to marketing.
Yes, exactly. And then, as you probably know, just looking at one attorney website after another, they all kind of have the same look and feel for one particular reason or another. But I kind of almost like to approach it and say, why don't you do something different and stand out from your competition and not have that same law firm protocol template that most law firms have? Maybe kind of change it up and your law firm will actually stand out. And at the same time, being in California, it's very important to at least have your homepage translated into Mandarin, Cantonese, some sort of Asian language, and of course Spanish too. That way you can actually be able to kind of capture other business from other people that normally wouldn't necessarily hire your services, but feel they could because you're open to other ethnic groups and other areas, and you have attorneys on staff that speak the language too.
And that's a very interesting approach. That's something that a lot of people don't really think about. And if when done properly, you're talking about every page, every keyword that you're doing, just translated it and then accessible to a whole new demographic.
Exactly. And then a lot of people don't do this, but then you could jump into SEO in different languages and various other things that you can do in different languages too. Obviously, the cost per click and the actual traffic is not as much, of course, but at the same time, that's a new area that some people aren't really diving into that you could possibly look into from a marketing standpoint.
And just one thing I want to add, because this is something that we're dealing with ourselves recently, all for setting up content-wise the same way. You can do paid campaigns the same way. Just be very, very cautious about setting up another business listing the same way and saying it's another firm, because it can compromise your current listing.
Exactly. Yeah, there's certain rules and regulations, and you have to make sure that everything is covered and you're in good with a state bar, and just being able to kind of make sure you're going the correct way and doing the great white SEO and white glove marketing. There's a lot of other gimmicks and other marketing companies out there that promise you and guarantee you everything, but there's no promises and there's no guarantees. As you know, in marketing, you could just say, hey, this is what we've done for this client, this is what we can do for you.
So speaking about opportunities, there's really 3 different ways to utilize Google. And I know that you said you briefly wanted to go over those 3.
Yes.
3 ways. So I'll sort of pass that off to you because I don't want to take the spotlight,
No problem. Yeah, we had kind of briefly touched about that, and we've actually talked quite a bit about diversity and various other marketing that we could do throughout California. But we also talked about exactly how can we get there fast. So one way to do that is the sponsorship links, which is the paid ads through Bing, Yahoo, or Google, just being able to be ranked there at the top. But then you can kind of get a little bit expensive, and you can kind of, have this egotistical approach, I would say. Not that attorneys have that, but just to be in the fact that, hey, I want to be number 1. And I said, it doesn't matter. This guy at number 1 on Google is paying X amount of money. You could be number 3 and pay half of what he's paying. So let's be in at number 3, because you're still going to be seen. The whole idea is you don't want them to scroll down or go to the second page of Google, because 90% of the people go to the first page of Google and they won't go to the second page of Google. What they will do is they will redefine and type in something different before they actually go to that second page of Google. They will redefine their search. So that is the paid ads through Google, where you're going to be shown at the top. And then the second place would be the Google My Listing, Google My Business, which is the local map directory listings. And then, of course, at the bottom of that is the organic SEO listing. So the whole idea is that I say, let's get your law firm ranked 3 times on Google. You have 3 times more chances of other law firms that might only be there ranked once.
And the beauty of coupling that with the opportunities in different geographies or going out to anywhere beyond your main location is you can establish yourself exactly that way in every market you desire, if done properly.
Yes, definitely. Just a little bit of initial marketing research, figuring out where you're going to go, what your budget is. I always say, okay, let's start small, let's start conservative, let's make sure it works. A lot of the law firms have been burned by other marketing agencies who promised them the world. So they're very cautious and very hesitant about spending any more of their marketing dollars. And they just rather say, I'll live off of my referrals, I'll live off whatever I got right now. But there's a lot of people out there that are trying to capture their business, like, of course, everyone is doing. That's what everyone's trying to do. That's how they make their money. So the whole idea is that be able to kind of spend it, figure out an approach, figure out it cautiously, and then we figure out what's work. And then when we know what works, we could throw a lot more money into it.
Is there anything particular that we haven't covered up until this point?
In order to have a bigger market share and hit up the bigger markets for better cases, you almost have to approach it like a college class, like a business 101 class, because what they don't teach you in law school is business, how to run a business. They teach you the law. They teach you how to be a lawyer. They have to teach you how to evaluate the law, but they don't tell you, maybe this has changed now because, I'm dated and I'm old, but the fact is, and I know a lot of attorneys that I went to school with that were in my college, and they don't have that business concept. They just kind of get thrown into it. So it's almost like taking a backwards approach to kind of like lining everything up. So I kind of call it like business 101, which, like, if you remember in certain college classes, you have this class 101 and that class 102, so to speak. So I don't know if you want to kind of end it that way. You have to be able to have some business common sense when it comes to certain marketing dollars and certain marketing funnels. And the best thing is to not spend that much money up front, but be able to spend it over time and consistently, but actually be able to have that same approach. What a lot of people would do, and what I've noticed before, is that have like, okay, this is my marketing budget. I want to use it all up within 90 days. And then that 90 days, I'm going to have enough business that's going to carry me over to the next 90 days, rather than kind of have a consistent approach to it.
I feel like sometimes, paid services purpose, but people don't know that they're setting themselves up for later. And then like organic, it's a long play, and it's a great approach that we would stand by until the end of time. But then people get impatient and they're like, well, I haven't gotten a lead, and says, you've never done SEO before, and you've only been doing this 6 or 8 weeks. So both have their pros and cons, and you have to have a good marketing mix to be successful.
Yeah, that's why I say you got to start with some paid after some initial research to kind of do that. And like I had mentioned earlier, then eventually when some of the rankings and some of the SEO kicks in, then you can kind of come down a little bit on your marketing budget from the paid side of things.
So James, if people want to reach out to you to possibly gain some further insight or even hire you to help them, what's the best way to reach out?
Best way to reach out is to give me a call at 714-915-3418. And I have an email address of james@massivewebsitemarketing.com. And I also have a few other email addresses as well. I haven't established a JPM for marketing because I have a new website literally in the works. I have an email address to that, but they all funnel it back into my personal email address anyway. The best thing, I consider myself an old school and a new school marketer. Just from where I came from and where I come to nowadays. So I like to get people on the phone and love them give me a call at 714-915-3418. And I say, let's do a business class. Before we talk marketing, let's talk business. Let's talk intake. Let's talk infrastructure. Let's talk how are we going to get this set up to make sure that we have all the protocols in place.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Mastermind podcast. If you're interested in working with Ryan and Chase, please email mastermind@marketmymarket.com. Make sure to join the free mastermind group for growing and managing your firm at lawfirmmastermind.com. Ryan Klein and Chase Williams are the managing partners at Market My Market, one of the top legal marketing companies in the United States.